You got a notification?
Yeah, I've just clicked that.
You got a notification?
Yeah, I've just clicked that.
Okay, I think we're live, guys.
All right.
I'm gonna stop sharing this. Okay. Okay, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is the first interview we're doing. I mean, just kind of a few words about Caesura for everybody watching. We are a magazine of art and criticism. We publish online quite frequently and also have print issues where we try to bring together critics, artists, and really just trying to get a sense of what is happening in what people are making in terms of art, but focusing on the aesthetic experience of work, kind of trying to bring into focus really the experience of making our works. What is the unique thing about our works? What kind of history art has, and what is specific about it, as opposed to other kind of practices we can do on the world. And this series of interviews came out with Patrick, both of us just talking about trying to have some sort of informal conversation with people who we're looking at, who we think are doing interesting work, and just kind of exploring, you know, what they are doing, how they understand what their practice is, where they're coming from, all sorts of things. And I don't know, Patrick, if you want to say something else, or we can just get started.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, one other thing to add about Caesura as a project and sort of how we understand what we're doing and, you know, how we're sort of thinking about art in the present, you know, I think we're concerned particularly with the critical legacy of modernism. And, you know, I think, you know, taking up a genre like landscape is sort of one of the ways that we want to think about how artists are, you know, are dealing with that legacy today, understanding their work in relationship to that legacy, and, you know, seeing what possibilities there remain for doing that in the present. You know, so I think to give a better sense of why David Abbott in particular, why this work, and, you know, why landscape. Yeah.
Okay, now we're gonna start. I'm gonna play the record button, so we have this for an extra recording of this. Okay, thanks, David, for being here. And I guess just to get us started, we were just talking about your education and things that you have been doing, and I just wonder if you can, you know, talk a bit more about that, like how you came about to do art, painting, like how did you came to be interested in the stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So I think I really first properly got into making art and being aware that art was something that was really worth doing, and that there were ideas to be had and interesting things to be seen in America when we moved there in the mid-90s, and I was in high school, and I had some incredible teachers that were kind of, they could have been professors really, but they were at high school level, and I was shown all sorts of things, and so I started to think really seriously about making work then, and from there have always studied art. I continued as an undergraduate in the States, and then did my postgraduate here in Bristol. But it was all quite, up until the last couple of years, it was mostly kind of print based, a lot of collage and mixed media work, drawing. I didn't really paint very much at all. I painted a bit when I was about 18 and 19, and did quite big paintings, and then spent years making prints and drawings and collages, and then came back to painting right at the beginning of the pandemic, when I had a bit of time really, and it was a real kind of fluke. It wasn't something that I had planned to do, and then my work got really tiny, and I've been, making quite small landscapes, in the last couple of years, and then I'm slowly kind of building back out to larger work. So yeah, it's I think I think about my work a lot as kind of working in exile. So when we moved to the States, for the first couple of years, I quite missed being in the UK. It was a bit, the transition to living in America wasn't totally easy, and I thought a lot about the landscapes of home, and then when I came back to the UK for a year off in between high school and university, that kind of flipped, and I became much more interested in the place that I just left, being Virginia, and then went back to university in the States, and the same thing kind of happened, and so my work is a lot about that, the idea of home and what place actually is. So my art education has always been, I've always been making art, but it's only been in the last couple of years that I've been making the landscapes that we're really here to talk about. And in amongst going to university and making landscapes, I was working as a graphic designer for 15 years. So that's probably it.
You mentioned when we were also talking earlier that some of the artists that you were looking at when you were in graduate school were like Lawrence Weiner, Ed Ruscha, and that you were working with language a lot. So it'd be nice to sort of hear about what your interest in that was, and sort of what you were doing, and maybe think about how that laid the groundwork potentially or not for the paintings that you're doing now.
Yeah. So words have always been really important. Well, I was saying to Gabriel earlier, one of the reasons why I decided to go to a liberal arts university in the States and not to an art school, which I could have done, and I had applied to like the Maryland Institute and RISD, and I made a decision to go to a liberal arts university because I wanted to keep doing things to do with words, primarily English literature, but also history, and I ended up doing some anthropology and sociology courses because I was very reluctant to kind of silo myself off into just making art. Now I realized an art college will involve lots of other things too, but I really wanted to keep the words around. And yeah, it's just always been something that has worked in tandem to making images as well. And then looking at Ed Ruscha, and obviously you have in most cases a duality of a picture and the words, and I when I was 18, 19, 20 and looked really into Ed Ruscha, I was that was kind of really thrilling, that you could have a picture and then you could have words and they didn't relate, and like where there was like a dissonance between them, and then Lawrence Weiner's work like took it even further, and I was just fascinated by the idea of the word as taken out of the context, the normal context of a word, whether it's speech or a book, and put on a wall of a gallery, and then it becomes this whole other thing, and becomes an object. And so my postgrad degree show was actually all printed words. I screen printed a load of really big words on the wall, and I made a big sculpture that just said no. And it was based on a sentence from a Richard Ford novel, and it was just it's just this thing about language that sometimes something happens with it, and it kind of triggers images that are associated or disassociated, and I find it really kind of thrilling.
I guess what that makes me think, just when I see somebody like, Ruscha or Lawrence Weiner, when you start looking at their works, there is this sense of like an intellectual experience in which there is the dissonance between what they say, how they're saying it, how is it being like put into words, and how does words kind of affect you. There's kind of a kind of shock, like an intellectual shock that like, and when I'm thinking about your new work, the work that is going to be on the show at Make Room. What I keep messing up the gallery's name.
Patrick, you know.
Yeah, make room.
Thank you. Is it's very physical, like the work on color, the kind of elaboration of the painting, the picture. You do have the titles, which we will talk about in a second, but you do have this like plate of forms and shapes and colors that have a more immediate relationship that is not sort of, the title mediates it in certain way, like helps you through, but it also, it stands on its own. And I do wonder how, through the experience of you moving away from that and starting doing these paintings, what did you feel that change?
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, yeah, I mean, that's interesting. So, I mean, landscape is, I like to think of it really as broadly as possible. And I think people use the word inscape to talk about artists that make work that is about some internal something going on. And so for me, my landscapes are inscapes. They're not, it's landscape painting because they are places, they are landscapes. But so I've always considered that my work has been landscape, even when I was working just with words, even when I was doing collages, which were, very much just shape and found objects, in the way that you think of collages, bits of text, bits of something from a catalogue, right back to when I was first kind of got into making art in high school, and I was making monoprints of stone circles that I'd kind of imagined in my head from my time living, growing up as a child in the UK. So they're all, for me, that they're all the same thing, but they're kind of, it went through the words are always really important, but they're not always present in the image itself. And I guess, like being able to title an image without those words being on the image allows you to kind of make two pieces of work. It's like you make the picture, and then you can like kind of fudge people's sense of what it is by titling it something different. You can insert an idea that maybe wouldn't be there otherwise. And I really, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that it brings to mind, or to me it brings to mind Walter Benjamin on photography, because he sort of talks about the relation, or he in his essay on photography, he sort of speculates about the possibility of pairing photography with captions and the effect that might have.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and going back to those Ed Rusches, I mean, I think there's such the American landscape is so kind of incredible, and the signscape of America, which Ed Rusches was obviously really into, the highway aspect. The things that you might just see as you drive down the highway. And I remember when I had just finished my degree, my postgrad here, I made some prints. I went to see a great friend over in the States in 2000, and it would have been like 2006, I think. And we drove down to Louisiana, and this was shortly after Katrina. So it's 2006, right? Yeah. And we went to Venice, Louisiana, which has been hit really badly. And this was like a year later, I think. And it was still like it had happened yesterday. And there was still the kind of Red Cross signs on the door that FEMA had put to say that there were deceased people in there, or that they were empty, or the people had been saved, and other people's signs, and people had spray painted "Have gun, will shoot," because obviously there'd be the lawlessness that had kind of come in the aftermath, and I was like really taken with that. So I made a print. I took the "Have gun, will shoot," and I took that and I made it into a street sign instead of a spray painted sign on the side of the house. And for me, like, that just feels so American. Like, not the gun violence part of it, but this kind of, I don't even know what it is. I'm sitting here trying to think, but Ed Rusches is a totally American artist, and that the dissonance between image and then suddenly this language, so you might have a beautiful mountain and then kind of a really blunt piece of language. I just found really novel, even though it was decades old. And now I don't think about my work in the same way. I don't title my landscapes to be so dissonant, but it taught me that you could do an awful lot with words associated with an image, whether it's on the image or off the image. Yeah. And well, I mean, I think we see it on, the fake news stuff that on Twitter, how someone pairs an image with some words and someone pairs the same image with some other words, and it's like, it means something different. And I think all that stuff is, incredibly interesting.
Yeah. I want to maybe talk a little bit about, let's see. I feel like a lot of what's come up has to do with this kind of being in between things. So, earlier you sort of talked about, the way that moving from between the UK and the United States sort of always had this effect of like missing the place that you were just leaving. Yeah. And again, also with, the relationship between the text and the image, there is like the kind of, one sort of implies the other or calls the other by its sort of difference or by its sort of, negative relationship. Yeah. So to speak. So, I guess I want to sort of think about like, I feel like the object of the work is neither sort of within the painting itself nor within like the title itself, but somewhere sort of in between, in like the relationship between the two, the dynamic. And they sort of seem to point to this other thing, which, seems to be sort of like the feeling of the work or what you're sort of trying to capture or register. I feel like what you were just talking about in terms of, your experience in Louisiana was sort of getting at that. But, I think it would be good to think about, in the work that you're doing now, what is it that you're drawn to in the landscape, or what is it that you are, what are the feelings that you are trying to register in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing for me is that the landscape there's nothing fixed about the landscape at all. And even within the space of 10 minutes and with a cloud going over the sun, the view that you have is completely changed. And there's no like greater metaphor really for our lives and our, and ourselves as feeling people, feeling things. And I think that, in terms of the relationship between the words and the image, it's a kind of, I hope that the way that I title my work opens the image up rather than shutting it down, that it suggests some kind of narrative that exists, that's going to exist beyond the image and existed before the image, and that the image is actually just maybe part of a, like a roll of film. I mean, I love music. I think music's the best. I think art is a poor second to music. Honestly, I mean, I love making art, and I can't make music. I've got a guitar. I could play. I could prove that to you. But I think the thing about music and words is that they both happen over time, and they have this, so they have a kind of ability to mutate. When I paint a picture, when the picture's done, it's done. But I want to kind of insert a sense into the picture that it's not done, or that 10 minutes earlier it would have been totally different, And so there's a kind of impermanence in my work that is it's the only thing I'm trying to put in it, really, is a sense that it's not going to be the same again. And obviously, in terms of what we face with the climate crisis, I thought, it feels very, it feels like the right way to think about our land and our landscapes and what we, what the things that we love, and yeah, I don't want to get too sad about that, but it's a part of the work.
Mm-hmm. I guess one thing that I mean, a couple of things I was thinking about, but maybe just to put one out there is, you do have this paintings that have a kind of, I don't know, they have a kind of dreamlike quality. They have a kind of subjective quality by the way that you like create the shapes, the form, the color. And you have these titles that have a kind of poetic turn. And so when I was looking at them, when I was thinking about it, it does seem to me to have, they have that subjectivity you were referring to. They have a certain feeling that you're impressing upon them, but you also seem to like go sometimes. They seem to be the same place, or they seem to be similar places, and
Yeah.
I do kind of. Well, the kind of first question is like, how you make your works. Like somebody like Richer always seemed like a person who get in a car and is driving by and go to stop at this place and take a picture of it or paint in there. And
Yeah.
there is obviously plein air paintings and paintings in the studio. So I don't know, like that would be, I really would love to know how you go about making them.
Yeah. I mean, I paint from photographs of places that I know and that have some kind of resonance with me. I don't, I'm not particularly interested in kind of wandering Britain looking for views to paint. I'm not particularly interested in people being able to recognize the place. I don't mind if they do. I don't mind being asked where it is. I'd happily share that, but it's not it's why I don't consider myself a landscape painter. But yeah, so these are places that I visit repeatedly or that have had some kind of meaning for me. They also tend to be fairly one of the things that I like about the English landscape, and I say English because I think it's different in parts of Scotland and parts of Wales, but the English landscapes that I experienced as a child and that I experience now on the weekends when I go out on my bike or I go out with the family and the dog, they're quite, they're quite small landscapes. They're not, it's not like Grand Canyon stuff here at all. I mean, they're, don't get me wrong, they're totally, up my alley, but they're not, it's not the kind of thing that you slap on a postcard every time. They can be quite plain, but I find that to be more useful in terms of making work because it feels like I can project more onto it. It's not, the landscape isn't shouting so much that I have that my paintbrush is like bidden to do something particular. It's that I can go, right, this field and this hedge are like fairly plain. I can have a think about what I want, what I'm feeling, and what how this is going to come out. And so in terms of making the work, it's it's a case of kind of having a feel for a place, taking photos normally over quite a long period of time, several visits, different seasons, and then working from just a kind of 4x6 photo. But I tend to like viewfind them, like tiny little crops, and which is really nice as well because I get them printed at this like really shitty online like one print for 2p kind of thing, and they come back quite pixelated, and so by the time I've viewfinded it, it's like I've got about 5 pixels of image to work with, and it's actually really nice because it means that it's another kind of filter from the real thing into what I imagine it to be. So yeah, like working from a photo, it sounds like what I'm trying to do is pin something down, but really I'm actually trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to open it right up. I haven't painted plein air. I've like done a few drawings. I mean, I love drawing, and I would go and sometimes go and sit and do a bit of drawing outside. But most of the time, I'd rather put my slippers on and sit in the studio and where it's nice and warm and like paint from my head. And from this tiny little bit of photo, that's that that's where the expression for me comes in. I mean, I know some painters that paint outdoors, and they make like beautiful paintings and views that are totally different from what the thing is, and they insert themselves into it. But for me, it's like it requires distance. It requires, and I think that's maybe related to what I was talking about earlier with being in the US and longing for the UK, and then the other way around. And I think, you know, being in the studio and maybe wanting to be out in the landscape, but not being there and looking at this viewfound thing, and it actually just really suits the work.
I think, Patrick, you are muted.
Yeah, sorry. So in terms of like the actual painting itself, the act of painting, sort of how, you know, I'm curious, sort of, I don't know, I guess there's a few different questions, you know, a few different things we could talk about. You know, there's artists that you're looking at, other painters that you're looking at, that you're thinking about in relation of your own painting. You know, I think there's your approach to color and light. You know, I think that would be interesting, especially since there are many of the same places that you sort of realize that they're the same, but they sort of shift dramatically in terms of the mood because of the choice of color and light. And so I wonder, you know, how you think about that, or how that process works. And then, you know, I think there's also just the compositions themselves, you know, sort of how you construct, you know, the shapes, and sort of there is almost like this puzzle quality to some of them in terms of the way that the shapes kind of layer up and stack up. But then in other ones, there's also, you know, I feel like you disturb that with like the way that you treat the surface, kind of roughness it has.
Yeah, the one that you chose for the YouTube like cover shot was definitely one of the kind of puzzly paintings. Yeah, I mean, I think so the views, the thing of like painting the same view over and over, I think there's a Patrick Kavanagh, the Irish poet, talked about how you could experience as much about life in the corner of a field as you could by traveling the world, and you know, it's an idea that we've all heard, but I just, you know, I love it, and I think it's true, and so I have no problem like with repeating views or kind of shifting things a little bit, because I think it's always different and we're always different. So I do all of my thinking really in the act of painting. So other than choosing the view that I'm going to paint, I don't have any other preconceptions. So sometimes they do come out quite puzzly, because that's how I'm feeling puzzled by them. And particularly when I was working in acrylic on wood, where it was really easy to you know, make a mark that I wasn't happy with, and to just kind of swipe it off and change it. The puzzly nature of painting, like the kind of real inquiry of painting, was really obvious in a lot of the paint in the work, and the one that you chose, I think, is really indicative of that. Now that I'm painting primarily in oil on canvas and linen, it's I mean, it couldn't be more different, really. I mean, I don't move between mediums particularly seamlessly. I feel like I have to relearn. No, relearn is not even the right word. Like, you know, just discover the thing. And I'm really happy to do that in the process of painting it. I'm not someone that I don't test things. I don't spend weeks trying to work out the medium in order to make my first painting beautiful. I'm just quite happy to make some shit paintings for a little while, or not quite get exactly what I'm trying to get. But I was really aware that working on board and with acrylics, that I didn't have the surface that I wanted, and I was working too fast. It's like, there's an artist called Ian McKeever, he's a British artist. And actually, when I was a graphic designer, I worked with him on his website, and he's a lovely guy. I think he's in like his late 60s, 70s. He's a Royal Academician. He's like a really, you know, proper artist. You should interview him. And he makes these huge oil paintings, really thin washes that he kind of he just works up, and then he moves the paintings across and sets them aside for weeks on end and comes back to them. And he talks a lot about how he's trying to take the heat out of painting, and so slowing it down, you know, kind of purposefully slowing it down. So he gets to a point where he really likes what he's doing, and then he puts it away, which is like, really like, whoa, that's not what I would do at all. But one decision I did make was I want to move away from acrylic, which dries in 20 seconds, and move to oil, and to slow down what I'm doing, and to maybe work on like 3 or 4 paintings at a time, and maybe put things aside and pull them out later. And it has really changed the way the paintings get made. And they've become much less puzzly because of it, because they have to be, I mean, there's still as much puzzling underneath, but I don't think visually it's as obvious. I think it's I've had to work in much thinner washes because I can't be so definitive with my mark making yet. I mean, maybe I'll become super confident with it, and I'll be Paul Nash and like dolloping stuff on and brushing it, but I think I think it really suits my work. It suits the kind of uncertainty that I want in my work. It suits the lack of permanence, and even though obviously oil paint is more permanent, but the washes and the kind of slowness just suit what I'm trying to say with my work. I want these things to be quiet. I want them to be puzzly as well, but even if they don't look it, I want them to kind of fall away from your eyes and sometimes come into focus. I mean, it's really funny because when I take photos of my work, my camera can't focus on the work because it's so like muted and so lacking in contrast at the moment, the works that are coming out, that my camera can't, the autofocus doesn't work, which is great, befuddling the camera was what I was trying to do this whole time.
I wanted to pick up on the other question that Patrick put about the other painters you love, the kind of tradition of landscape painting. But I was thinking when we earlier were talking about you working with words and doing collages, and there's something that always seemed to me counterintuitive about painting, which was that it really opens up a whole history of things, of works, of aesthetic experiences that come back, hundreds of years as opposed to, more recent things. And you think about 19th century landscape, both British and French landscape, or you think about all masters like Rubens and the kind of works that he did at the end of his life. I think like it is very interesting when you start doing like painting and landscape painting in particular. There is this kind of tradition in which there's a lot of ideas being thrown there and a lot of experiences that you can sort of learn from or look at, and I do wonder what kind of things you felt it open up, what kind of things did you start looking more when you start moving to do this kind of landscape? Like how did you relate it to the history of art, like now that you're making this kind of work?
Yeah, oh man, that's a big question. There's a lot of questions in that question. Well, it's interesting that when you opened the conversation, you're talking about Caesura and the idea of kind of coming to terms with modernism. And there's a great book that I read recently called Romantic Moderns by Alexandra. Oh gosh, my memory for names. Alexandra something. I'm sorry, Alexandra something. I should know your name. And she talks about how the British, we really tried to do modernism. We really gave it a shot, but we have one foot very firmly planted in the past as well. So Paul Nash, while some of his works, the one of like the Spitfire Sea, is incredibly modern in its concept, it's still like firmly rooted in the tradition of landscape, seascape, painting, as is all his other work. And I feel very much kind of, trapped that's not the right word at all, but very much part of that conversation between ideas and I guess like pictorialism, right? Like it's they're pictures at the end of the day. I can title them esoterically, but they're still pictures that and I think a lot of people that that collect my work or that like my work, buy them because they're landscape paintings as well. They don't have to be anything more. But I kind of, when I think about the history of, I mean, it's a really big question. Because the way that I paint landscapes is about because they're inscapes to me. I look at the history of landscape as the same thing. The 19th century British and French landscape painters, and back to when landscape painting became a genre in and of itself in like the 17th or 18th, early 18th century. My dates are probably slightly wrong, but it's quite late that people only painted landscapes. They were painting their own preoccupations, the preoccupations of the time. They weren't painting. I don't think you get representational landscape painters. I think you get people who. I think you have people who paint landscapes and are painting themselves. And if you look at the kind of the sublime landscapes of the like 18th, 19th century British stuff, where like we suddenly discovered the Lake District and Scotland and these kind of rocks and lightning, and we were like obsessed with the sublime. That's not. It's not any more representational of the landscape than my works are. They are. It's filtered through the kind of preoccupations of the time. And I mean, so in terms of stuff that I look at, I love looking at, like, I mean, and this is a very broad term, but I love religious paintings from like medieval through Renaissance, from anywhere. Like I just find them, I mean, the colors are amazing, the kind of forms and the way that they're just a superb way of packing like so much story into one image. But I love the little slivers of landscape that you get down each side, and this like the blue of distance thing, and like to me, I could just like stare at that tiny little sliver. But that says everything you need to know about what they thought about landscape. It's like behind a wall and behind the narrative, which is Saint Stephen getting shot with arrows or the Virgin Mary, and so landscape's always there. It's always in our paintings. It's always in our work. But it's like we don't look at landscape paintings. We look at people's paintings of themselves. That's how I think about landscape. So like I'm super aware of being in a tradition of landscape painters because I am painting landscapes. But I'd like to think of myself in the tradition of just like creative people, making stuff. I think of myself as an artist. I don't think of myself as a landscape painter. I don't think of myself as a painter. I think of myself as an artist that is currently making paintings. But on the same, on the other side of the coin, I tremendously value the landscape paintings that have come out of particularly the British Isles, because I do look at that more closely, because I feel not in a kind of isolated, not in an isolationist way, but in a like, this is what I know as well. So it feels right to look at that first. And I feel tremendously privileged to be part of that tradition, even if other people wouldn't put me up with those people. It's just nice to be part of that tradition and to be painting those places, which are kind of full of history and full of weird stories and I know that like going back to the idea of modernism, British modernism not quite being as modernist as like its European counterparts or even the American ones. The kind of prehistoric character of the British Isles is so like present all the time. I can go up the road and walk my dog, and there's a dip in the field that is what was an old lane, and it's on all the pre-19th century maps as it's called Snail Creek Lane, and now it's just a dip in the field. But that was like walked by hundreds of people between going to church and I don't know, going to their equivalent of the greengrocers, and I just I just think that is everything. That's just amazing. So there's this. It's hard to get away from the past in this country, in our landscapes here, because people have been on all of the land here for so long, and there's not a single view in Britain that hasn't been changed by people, and that isn't full of story. And I find that, you know, fascinating. The human part of landscapes. Sorry, that was really long-winded. I hope I answered something of that.
No, that was pretty good. I mean, I was thinking about something similar. Like, I'm in New York, but you get up on a car and you go to like the Catskills or upstate New York, and it's that same kind of thing.
Yeah.
In your mind, it just changes the way you look at things because it has, you know, it has already been absorbed by some other subjectivity, another person, this painter who 100 years ago came here and like transformed it.
Yeah.
And my vision of it is sort of enriched by that.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting that, yeah, there is the difference with England, in which you do have also just human history. You have like hundreds and thousands of years of just people having habitated these places in a way that sometimes here you feel that it's like a kind of abandoned, you know, freer, just nature thrown there, although may not be sometimes.
Yeah.
But it does feel more. It was interesting that you said that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm aware that it's easy to get into slightly tricky ground with, you know, because the indigenous peoples of North America have been there for, you know, a long time, you know, like they're, yeah, I mean, so what I'm trying to say is that Britain is no more ancient than North America or South America or Africa. You know, we've all had people, you know, doing their thing over our landscapes, and our landscapes, all of our landscapes have been affected by that. But you know, it's just about resonance, really. It's just you know, for me, it's like, you know, when I go back to my childhood memories and then the landscapes that feel like home and that feel like they yield like their secrets easier in Britain for me. I get it. Like that's my family history is pretty much all here, you know, and that's really, you know, so it makes it easier to kind of to use that. I think it doesn't feel like I'm borrowing something I shouldn't. It feels like it's like okay for me to have to add something to that, and I think that's what people like Paul Nash and Revilius, you know, were getting at as well, at a time when what this country was, you know, and Europe was under threat from, you know, from fascism, and so actually, like, I mean, you haven't asked this question, but landscape is having a bit of a thing at the moment, and I think it's, you know, because there are some severe pressures in the world, political ideologies, various humanitarian and ecological crises that seem like they're going to totally overwhelm us, and you know, for me and for so many people, it's like you go onto the land and you, like, everything is simpler. It's like a simple transaction between a person and the thing in front of you, and you take out that kind of the political element, even though the land is also incredibly political. But I think landscapes, doesn't surprise me at all that there's a lot of landscape painting being done at the moment, because I think it's I think it speaks to like a kind of a simplicity that we crave. How are we doing, guys? I might have lost you. Have I lost you?
No, we're good. Just
Metaphorically lost you.
thinking about where to go from here. You know, I feel like there's, you know, talking about landscape more generally, and what the appeal of it is, or what people are why there seems to be why it seems to be having a moment. The simplicity thing is, I don't know. I think there may be something, or I think it might be a little bit more complicated. And I think, even in talking with you about your work and your relationship to the landscape, I think that, or what I've been sort of constantly thinking about or coming back to as we've been talking is this sort of like sense that like what the object of landscape painting seems to be for you is like capturing something that isn't there, or it's precisely capturing like the quality of something being absent or moving away, or you talked about like the places that you're painting as being these sort of in-between places, or these sort of even just now talking about the sort of dip and the lane that people walk through, there is a sense of like the landscape being something that you're sort of like moving through. And while there is this sort of like accumulation of history, there is at the same time the sort of inaccessibility of that at first, or that the landscape has this history, but it's also not something that's necessarily obvious, or it's something that you sort of you can feel, but like it's I feel like the precisely like the quality that your paintings have is sort of like this enigmaticalness, this it's the uncertainty that you talked about. So I don't know what you think about that, or yeah,
I mean, I think all those things. I don't know where the kind of, if there is a, it does feel like, as we say, that there is an interest in landscape painting. I don't know where that, if all the people that are making landscapes are thinking the same thing about it. Which is probably why I came back, kind of just like the simplicity thing is oversimplification, but it's maybe like the transaction between an artist and the landscape is on the surface can be incredibly simple, but there's all these other things going on behind, which is the same with like a field and whatever's underneath it, or a woodland and then whatever's inside it. I don't know what the resonance thing is with people and landscapes.
Maybe one thing we can talk about it, or one way to approach it would be through memory. That's something that we haven't really talked about, and something that's very present in your work, or something that you think about a lot. So maybe you want to talk about how memory plays a part in how you think about it.
So I have a really bad memory. I consider that I have a very bad memory, and which again kind of suits my, is what I think why my work is I try and keep it open. The possibilities of the thing that's being painted quite open, because it allows me to kind of dredge up stuff that I don't remember particularly well, but that it may just be a kind of a feeling or a sense of what existed for me at one point. And then the kind of broader idea of memory of like a community's memory, or like a cultural memory, or a landscape's memory of itself, links back into the kind of the temporality of it, where memory is an interesting one. I think it is, for me, it is about being able to kind of make work that kind of fills in some of the gaps in my own memory, like memory. This is something I haven't really said out loud before. It's like I write about it a lot, but when we talk about memory, we talk about memories that we have, right? Like, oh, do you remember that time we did this? And oh yeah, and that person was wearing that t-shirt, and wasn't that really funny? But memories also, like everything that isn't remembered, like it's a lack of memory too. And so like John Clare, who's you'll know his poetry, an English poet from the 19th century, and he was like called like the peasant poet because he was a farmer, basically, farmhand, and he talked about these. He would write these poems about things that he had seen in on the land and in nature, and he called them remembrances. They were kind of like hazy. They were already hazy things, and I like to think about memory like that. That you're not always sure. When I paint, it's like I'm opening the door to things coming up, like from deep in here that I can't remember as memories, but are surely in there. So it's like if you had a stew and the memories themselves were the bits of meat or the vegetables. The rest of the stew is really important though, but it's not defined. It's just the mix of stuff. I'm like quite interested in the gruel around, the broth rather than the bits of meat. And so I don't know if I'm answering this question at all, or even enlightening you as
this
to
is great.
what I do. But I find the haze. The phrase like through the mists of time. I feel like the mists of time is what my head is. Like I don't have my memory is so kind of scattered that it feels like I'm mining mists, and I think that's the best way for me to make work that speaks to like as many people as possible, because it remains quite kind of vague and open. I mean, more open. Not vague is not a good word, but open.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I mean, I wanted to circle back to one of the other things. That was great. So I think the idea of the memory that we usually have is, a memory kind of narrows specific things that you remember. It takes away, like it centers on the sentiment. And there is something interesting about expanding from that kind of narrowing down into the things that are around the stew, as you call it. It does may teach you more about your own feeling about that object than the kind of single like sentiment kind of concrete and that's the great thing about something like painting, is that you can expand upon a feeling that you may have had towards an object by like working it through in the painting. But I did wanted to circle back to the landscape question and to something you had said before, which is that I'm forgetting exactly how you put it, but that there is like a personal quality, kind of an intimate quality. And I do have a sense that landscape is having a moment, but the way that I see it is that you had like serious periods of art just before now in which the desire to make something like meaningful in like a social, cultural, political way, like meaningful outside of its own, aesthetic meaning, like aesthetic feeling, importance, was like a pressure on artists. Like you have to make political art sometimes, and there's people who do good art out of that. But I've seen a lot of this return to painting as something like, artists trying to do just art, like something more poetical, something more intimate, something perhaps more, that focusing, like more focus on that relationship with the experience of painting or with the experience of object. And somehow painting, landscapes or people, this kind of thing, painting itself has that kind of possibility. Like it offers people the possibility of just focusing on the aesthetic experience of making that work. And I do wonder what you think about that, just kind of in general. I mean, I also think about modernism. Modernism is starting with landscapes, you know, impressionist. Like the impression is like the form that they took is landscapes, because that kind of enabled their vision. And so, yeah, just throwing that there into that kind of question that is like stuff we was just lingering in, I think.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah. I mean, the modernism starting with landscapes is great. Great thing to kind of remember. It's almost like they had to transition with something that people knew already, and to make the transition obvious. It's like when they, you know, when Christianity took over paganism in this country, and they built churches in the middle of stone circles, so it made it more palatable for people to go to church. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's just like getting to a particular point in my life, but I'm much more reluctant to, I mean, despite the fact I can witter on at length about whatever, obviously, I'm quite reluctant to make statements in my life, you know, and I think when I was in my 20s and in my 30s, I was more interested in statements, more interested in kind of nailing things down, or like, or having a concept that that made the work political, and made it thought-provoking. And now I'm, you know, much more along the lines of like Agnes Martin and that kind of not having ideas about the work. Certainly not before it gets made. You know, I think a lot about my work. I write a lot about my work, and I really relish the opportunity to talk to people like you about my work, because it's interesting in retrospect to look at my work and have other people tell me what they think, you know. But I'm very reluctant now to have ideas before I make my work. And in some ways that suits a kind of suits painting. That's not to say there aren't loads of painters who have ideas and make work, and then their work's great. But the kind of the accessibility of landscape painting and the kind of pictorial qualities of that, and the history and the context of making landscape paintings feels like a really great place to not have ideas, but have an awful lot of ideas as well, and to you know, to be aware of the history and the, you know, it's every piece of work happens in isolation from art history, but every piece of work ends up as part of art history, and I think that for me is I don't know, it's just an interesting place to be. You know, I like making this work that's pictorial, but also is full of like potential ideas and feelings. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, Adorno sort of famously described his own approach to making music, to composing music, as, you know, forgetting everything he knows about music without actually having forgotten it in the end.
Yeah.
That's his sort of ideal way of working.
Yeah, I mean, I love that stuff, and there's the you know, a lot of artists go through art school and they spend the rest of their life trying to like get away from their education, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It's not like you're literally getting away from it. It's still tucked in there. It's just that you're learning to listen to yourself, you know, and not to, you know, it's funny because like, you know, I like everyone else follow Jerry Saltz on Instagram, and I mean, that guy makes statements about all sorts, and sometimes he'll say something and it's like a kind of anti-statement, and it's like, yeah, okay, I like that. But most of the time, I mean, he's not an artist, I guess. I mean, he does make work, but he's a critic first. So maybe it's easier to make statements as a critic, and that maybe you have to earn a dollar. But I'm much more interested in the kind of like not having to make those statements myself. Yeah. So yeah, the kind of openness in the work is really beneficial, I think. Now we'll see. Maybe I'll hit 70 and I'll start, spray painting things on walls, or I don't know.
We are almost at an hour. That's pretty good.
I could do another hour.
We can do another hour.
Oh, yeah. I was just gonna. There's a video that there's an 11-minute film by Larry Gottheim called Fog Line. It's called Fog Line. I put it on my website. You can find it on Daily Motion, I think. And I just wanted, when Patrick, when you got in contact with me about this, I'd literally just seen it. Someone on Instagram had flagged it up with me, and it's great. It's 11 minutes of a still camera focused on a landscape in fog, slowly revealing itself with some like phone lines or electric cables across the view, and it's like kind of everything that I could ever want my work to be, even though it's a film. It's the film that I would make if I was going to make films about a landscape and memory and temporality, and I just wanted to flag it up. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out, because it's just a lovely, if I was allowed to kind of play it in a gallery next to my work, I would, because it feels like I authored it, but through someone else.
Patrick, is he allowed to play it next to the work in the gallery?
I can try to get in contact with the artists, see what, I can look into it.
Yeah, it's a lovely piece. I just thought it's worth mentioning. If there's anyone watching beyond my family, then yeah, if you haven't seen it, it's just a lovely, it just, for me, it's like you're watching this thing change, but what you realize is that it's you changing in over 11 minutes. It's your eyes are seeing the things reveal as they reveal, and it's kind of, just so articulate about some of the things that I really care about in terms of landscape painting and looking at landscapes and thinking about them disappearing or becoming clearer. So
one nice thing about being in this informal Zoom world that we are is that I could play that right now. We can watch a minute or two.
Yeah,
so
that would definitely test the audience. 11 minutes of
and we were not going to do the 11 minutes because they may take our video down. We want
to do a minute.
But this is, I think, what you're talking about. You can see it.
Yeah, there we go. Look at that. I mean, it's actually like, even the shape of the trees is pretty much the way I paint trees. Just blobs.
Mm-hmm. I love that there is, there's not that like the romantic scene. It's like the electric lines.
Yeah. Oh, I just think that's brilliant. I mean, it kind of, those lines refer to all kinds of things, like the perspective and grids and obviously that, just like communication and the modern world. And I just love that he left them there.
Mm-hmm.
There's another little film that I saw recently by Derek Jarman of a trip that he took to Avebury Stone Circle in like the 70s, and it's really nice as well. But it is much more. I mean, you can see the trees on the left coming through,
mm-hmm.
And the Derek Jarman one is much more. It feels a bit more romanticized, a bit more, definitely more stylized. Whereas this is a very like straight up. And those electric lines or whatever they are make it, really flatten the view. And I think does a lot to kind of say how we should approach this as very much a matter of fact revealing of something rather than a kind of sentimental look at landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And what's great as well, if you get to the 11th minute, you don't even see very much in minute 11. It's basically like still really foggy, and I think that's just brilliant.
I'm gonna leave people to look at by themselves the 11 minutes.
Yeah. That's good.
It's pretty great. Um, one thing that it is looking at this one made me think is just how flat all of these things are when they are like the fog, when it gets this mist of things, all the landscape becomes very flat.
Yeah.
You have a different sensation towards depth, and perspective. It just gets lost.
Yeah.
And, you know, in a lot of the landscapes you paint, there is this kind of like routes that the eye can follow, that it does create the impression that you get into the painting.
Yeah.
And yet it's very on the surface. Like sometimes you would have a circle in the middle of it, that's just like a circle, like it's just a very flat thing. And so there's that play that's just kind of interesting, like visually.
Yeah. I don't have anything to add to that. I think that's right. You know, I think the flatness is important. I do have something to add to that, I guess. The flatness is important in that it for me, it kind of takes the actual, removes the painting from the location a little bit more, you know. It becomes less important that you're in that particular landscape, but that you're just looking at this moment in time and imagination, I guess.
Yeah, it becomes like how do they used to call it in the 18th century, like an interior voyage, like the interior journey as opposed to the journey into the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sort of allows that subjective element of it to come through.
Yeah, absolutely. And the medieval painters it was all like that as well, you know, really flat. And it's just really like it kind of it feels like it allows the narrative to kind of percolate rather than too much space to kind of come in. It's like I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. I mean, I think my paintings are quite flat, but yeah, I haven't really thought about why exactly. I need to have a think about that. Ask me in a month.
Well, are you guys gonna do something for the show? Are you planning, Patrick, to do something else after? When is the show happening, by the way? You need to kind of promote this thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's still in sort of in production, so you know, I'm still figuring out the details, but you know, it will be in January, end of January. I've been sending out a second round of invites, so the lineup of the artists is changing a little bit, but hopefully I can get that finalized this month and then start moving on to figuring out the actual works in the show. But I did find Larry Gottheim's contact, so I will.
Oh, nice! There we go.
I'll get in touch with him.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing.
Yeah,
as long as you don't pay too much for it.
Yeah, we'll see. I'll get in touch with him and see if he's interested in showing that film. Because I think that's would make a really nice addition, actually. But yeah. We'll see. Maybe we'll also, I mean, one thing I was thinking of would be great to plan a film screening to go with the show, but we'll see time-wise, resources-wise, what I can manage.
Yeah.
Together, but yeah, this was a great conversation. I'm glad.
Yeah, thank you guys. Is there anything else you wanted to ask?
How do we it's the first time doing this, and I think we went through like so many things. So I'm like a bit kind of, I mean, thanks so much for doing it. I mean,
yeah, of course.
If you have any last thing you definitely want to get out there to the few people who look at Caesura, what would you say?
No, I mean, you know, this is kind of the first one of these I've done, I'm conscious that, you know, you kind of, all you ever do is catch someone at a particular moment, and they fill the interview with words of a particular kind, and then, you know, in like 6 months' time, you do another interview, and you're already onto like different ways of thinking about your work. So I'm done with, I'm happy with what I've said, I think. I'll watch it back and maybe regret it. But I think it's, it's nice to stop and then just think in 6 months' time, what's happening, or even Patrick in January, the works that I get over to you, they'll be different, they'll have something else going on. And I love that about making work, that it changes all the time. So yeah, I'm happy to finish there.
Great. And people who are watching this and are in LA, they should go and see the show at late January, February.
Yeah.
We'll post it out there. People will see it.
Yeah.
But it's great to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
And we'll get this recording posted on our website as well, so that it can live there.
Great. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Enjoy the rest of your days.
All right.